The Skarn armada filled the void like a wound that refused to close, thousands of vessels arranged in concentric rings around the dying world of Threlpatha. Commander Kael'rix stood on the bridge of the Vedhari Resolve, watching the tactical display paint a portrait of inevitable defeat. The coalition fleet, what remained of it, drifted in ragged formation, its ships scarred, its crews exhausted from 3 years of retreat. Casualties from the last engagement? Kael'rix asked, though the answer was already written in the silence of the bridge crew. 41 ships, replied the tactical officer, a Dravani with iridescent scales gone dull with fatigue. We have 106 left in the entire coalition. The Skarn have over 4,000. Kael'rix said nothing. There was nothing to say. The coalition of free worlds had been built on the bones of a dozen species who had banded together when the Skarn began their conquest, but bones alone could not stop an avalanche. They had tried diplomacy. They had tried sabotage. They had tried every tactic their combined military doctrine could produce, and still the Skarn ground forward, world by world, like a tide that did not care what it drowned. Sir, the comms officer said, hesitation thick in her voice, we're receiving a transmission. Unregistered signal pattern. It's not coalition protocol. Then it's Skarn deception. Ignore it. Sir, the encryption is, I've never seen anything like it. It's not breaking through our systems. It's asking permission. Kael'rix turned, mandibles clicking in surprise. No Skarn transmission had ever asked permission for anything. Patch it through. The voice that came over the comm was calm in a way that felt almost insulting given the chaos surrounding them. This is Admiral Darian Voss of the United Earth Expeditionary Fleet, designation Hammerfall. We've been tracking the Skarn advance for the past 6 months. We'd like to offer assistance, if the coalition is willing to accept it. Kael'rix had heard of humans. Everyone had heard of humans, in the way one heard of old wars and extinct predators, third-hand stories, half-believed, mostly dismissed as exaggeration. A species that had fought its way out of a dozen near extinctions on its own homeworld, that had supposedly turned back 2 separate extragalactic incursions before retreating into isolation a century ago. Most scholars considered the stories embellished folklore, the kind of thing newer species told each other to feel less alone in a hostile galaxy. Admiral Voss, Kael'rix said carefully, the coalition is grateful for any offer of aid, but I must ask, what exactly does the expeditionary fleet bring to this engagement? We are facing 4,000 Skarn warships. There was the faintest pause, almost amused. We brought 12. The bridge crew exchanged glances. 12 ships against 4,000 was not aid. It was a funeral procession. Commander, Voss continued, I understand your skepticism. I'd ask the same question. But I'd like to request a tactical conference before you make any decisions about troop positioning for tomorrow's engagement. We've been running our own analysis of Skarn fleet behavior, and we believe we've found something your doctrine has been missing. The conference happened over a secure relay an hour later, holographic projections of both commanders flickering above the strategic table. Darian Voss was younger than Kael'rix expected, human aging was difficult to judge, but the Admiral's hair had only just begun to gray at the temples. His uniform was plain, unadorned by the elaborate rank insignia most coalition officers wore. His eyes, though, carried the particular stillness Kael'rix had only seen before in soldiers who had stopped being afraid of death a long time ago. Your fleet fights defensively, Voss said without preamble, pulling up a recording of the coalition's last 3 engagements. Every formation, every maneuver, it's built around minimizing losses. That's not a criticism. It's smart, given your numbers. But the Skarn have learned to read it. They know you'll fall back before you'll overextend, so they push, and push, and push, and you keep retreating because the math says retreating is correct. The math is correct, Kael'rix said. We cannot afford to lose ships we cannot replace. You're right. You can't. Voss leaned forward. Which is exactly why we're not going to ask you to lose any. He outlined the plan in clipped, economical sentences. The 12 human ships, designed for deep strike doctrine that prioritized speed and precision over mass, would not engage the Skarn fleet head-on. They would punch through the formation's command cluster, the nerve center coordinating the Skarn's coordinated swarm tactics, and sever it before the wider battle even began. The coalition fleet's role was simple: hold the line just long enough for that strike to land, then exploit the chaos that followed. "You're proposing we bait 4,000 ships while 12 of yours try to decapitate their command structure," Kelrick said. "I'm proposing we end this battle in the first 6 minutes instead of losing it over 6 hours. And if your strike fails?" Voss's expression didn't change. "Then we die first, and you fall back exactly the way you would have anyway. You lose nothing you weren't already prepared to lose." It was the cold logic of it that convinced Kelricks more than any appeal to honor or legend could have. Voss wasn't selling a miracle. He was offering a calculated gamble with asymmetric risk, all of it absorbed by his own people. "Why?" Kelricks finally asked. "Your species withdrew from galactic affairs a century ago. Why come back now, for a war that isn't yours?" For the first time, something flickered behind Voss's stillness, not hesitation, but old grief, carefully contained. "Because we know what it looks like when no one comes. We remember being the ones who needed help and got silence instead. We don't do that to people anymore. Not if we can help it." The battle began at dawn ship time. The coalition fleet arranged in a wide defensive crescent that the Skarn read immediately as the same predictable posture they'd exploited a dozen times before. Their armada surged forward with contemptuous confidence, 4,000 ships converging like a closing fist. No one saw the 12 human vessels until they were already inside the formation. They didn't announce themselves. There was no opening volley, no warning shot, just 12 ships dropping out of a sensor-ghosting approach vector directly into the heart of the Skarn command cluster, weapons already firing before the Skarn even registered the intrusion. Kelricks watched the tactical display redraw itself in real time as 3 Skarn command carriers went dark within 90 seconds, their coordination network collapsing into static. "Their formation is breaking," the tactical officer said, disbelief bleeding into her voice. "Commander, the swarm coordination, it's gone. They're fighting independently." "Then we stop holding the line," Kelrick said. "We attack." The coalition fleet surged forward into the confusion, and for the first time in 3 years, the battle did not feel like survival. It felt like victory. It cost them. 8 of the 12 human ships did not survive the engagement, their wreckage tumbling silent among the stars they'd helped reclaim. But the Skarn armada, stripped of its command structure and thrown into disarray, broke and scattered within the hour, a retreat the likes of which no coalition strategist had dared imagine possible. In the aftermath, Kelricks found Admiral Voss standing alone in the observation deck of the Hammerfall's flagship, watching the wreckage drift past the viewport. 4 of his ships, gone. Crews he had personally commanded into a battle he'd known would cost lives. "You lost a third of your fleet to save mine," Kelricks said quietly. "We lost a third of our fleet to end this war faster than it would have ended otherwise. That's not the same as a sacrifice for strangers." Voss didn't turn from the window. "It's an investment in not fighting this exact battle again in another 10 years, somewhere else, with someone else's children." Kelricks considered the human beside him a small, fragile-looking by Dravani standards, utterly without the imposing physical presence the old legends had suggested. And yet there was something in the way he carried the weight of those losses, openly, without performance or pretense, that made the legends suddenly feel less like exaggeration and more like understatement. "The stories about your people," Kelricks said. "I always assumed they were myths grown larger with retelling." For the first time, Voss allowed something like a smile, tired and genuine. "Most legends are smaller than the truth, Commander. We just don't usually stick around long enough to prove it." Behind them, the wreckage of the Skarn armada continued to drift apart, and somewhere among the stars, word was already beginning to spread that humanity had returned, and the galaxy would never be quite the same again.